Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the conference, and welcome to this exciting presentation on economic inclusion by fixing information poverty, a topic that I'm very interested in and excited about hearing more about. I'm Jim Clinton with Central Louisiana Economic Development Alliance. Had the opportunity recently to co-chair the Rural Development Task Force for the Governor's Resilient Louisiana Commission. In our very first meeting, when we were just trying to identify the topics that we wanted to work on, the topics we wanted to focus on, we realized that every single topic that we wanted to work on was impacted by what has usually been known as the digital divide, but certainly is information poverty. And that became our number one recommendation. We passionately believe that closing that gap and making information more relevant, more useful, more accessible to the folks in our economy is a matter of urgency and importance. We are very happy to have with us today Anatolia Ubaldi. He is an entrepreneur, an inventor, an economic developer, CEO and founder of SizeUp, which is a small business intelligent internet service for economic development organizations. He speaks all over the world and has been featured in major networks and business journals. He's written 2 books on economic development. Before his founding of his companies, he worked in local economic development with a focus on downtown revitalization, waterfront development, redevelopment, business attraction, business retention, and site selection. So he speaks to this audience from a point of view of knowing what we do and what our challenges are. So we are very honored to welcome to this conference Anatolia Ubaldi.
Thank you so much, Jim, for that terrific introduction. And thank you, everybody, for attending. I'm happy to be here in front of you today. Let me start by talking about why this matters and why this issue. And I think Jim gave a great introduction to this issue. A lot has changed. A lot has changed in our economy. And so, as Jim mentioned, I'm like you. I've been a traditional economic developer. I've used the traditional tools that we've used in our profession: business attraction, business retention. We focus on entrepreneurship. We've done real estate development, things like that. But as the economy has changed, more and more of all of our work is driven by what? By technology, by information, by data. Now this has become such a high-level issue that it's something that we as economic developers have to be very focused on. And not in an old way of just saying, oh, we're focused on technology companies, but how technology is pervasive within our lives. So a lack of access to technology hurts local economies. Inequitable access to the internet and computing devices creates what Jim talked about, a digital divide, which disadvantage marginalized populations, including the poor, racial minorities, women, and the less educated. Structurally, information poverty and income poverty create a vicious cycle. Today, expansive access to computer devices, high-speed internet, and data and information is essential to thriving economies. Technological competence combined with digital access is also defining economic winners. So the tech have-nots find themselves economically disadvantaged. By implementing programs that specifically address the technological divide in our communities, we as economic developers can implement wealth and economic activity across our entire population and geography. What I'm going to talk about today is, first, quantifying the digital divide for marginalized populations. Second, how information poverty negatively impacts economic development. And the third is programs for economic developers to reduce information poverty. So Jim and I were talking before we got on this call. This is not an academic talk, right? We're going to use data because you are going to need data when you're going to your city councils or whoever you're going to justify your public policy and new programs. But I'm a practitioner. I'm like you. What I'm looking for is solutions, and you're going to get solutions during this presentation. So let's start first with this issue of the digital divide. Technology and the internet have been positioned as a utopian path to digital democracy and a level playing field. However, this egalitarian ideal does not align with the bifurcated reality. Instead, technology, data, and the internet have disproportionately benefited those who already were the most privileged. Instead of equality, it's enabled greater inequality. Not everyone has, uses, or knows how to use technology. Effective targeting of economic development assistance to bridge this digital divide requires a quantified understanding of who is in need. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. So the first way we're going to quantify it is around the issue of income. The digital lives of lower and higher income Americans is very different. About 3 in 10 adults with household incomes below $30,000 a year don't own a smartphone. More than 4 in 10 don't have broadband services at home or a traditional computer. And a majority of lower income Americans are not tablet owners. But by comparison, each of these technologies is nearly ubiquitous among adults in households earning $100,000 or more a year. Higher income people are more likely to have multiple devices to go online, whereas many lower income people have to rely on their smartphone to go online. And this idea of where you're really just relying on your phone is what's being called underconnected. This forces low-income people to use their phones for tasks that are typically reserved for large screens, such as applying for jobs online. It also impacts students because 35% of lower-income households with school-age children did not have a broadband internet connection at home. There's also impacts of a continuous access uncertainty, as a third of families with mobile-only access quickly hit the data limits on their mobile phone plans, and about a quarter have their phone services cut off for lack of payment. Actually, now that we're in COVID, I'm experiencing this. But think about kind of the inequity of this. I have great access to internet. I hit my limit because I went well over a terabyte of data consumption in 1 month. Get your head around that. A terabyte of data, and I maxed it out. So think about the lower income workers and families in your communities who don't have nearly that type of access. The next thing I want to talk about is geography. If you think about across your state, your rural, urban, and suburban areas all have very different characteristics. And I want to talk about the trends that we're seeing related to them. Rural residents have made gains in closing the gap with digital technology, but they're still 12 percentage points less likely than Americans overall to have home broadband. They're also less likely to own a smartphone, tablet, or desktop or laptop computer than suburban and urban adults. 15% of rural adults never go online, compared with 9% living in urban communities and 6% who live in the suburbs. Nearly 1/4 of rural residents say that getting access to high-speed internet is still a problem in their community. Substantial areas of rural America still lack the infrastructure needed for high-speed internet, and the access that these areas do have tends to be slower than that of non-rural areas. This is a situation where rural communities, for really no fault of the people living in them, are at a disadvantage of many of their urban counterparts. However, now let's talk about urban locations. As trouble as rural adoption in broadband is, there are 3 times as many urban households unconnected to broadband. Urban adoption is a factor of consumer adoption more than geography. A larger driver of non-adoption is the household cost of monthly broadband fees and the expense of a computer. And what this shows is that even if a household has the physical infrastructure to be able to consume high-speed internet, it won't if it can't afford to use it. The next thing we should look at is the issue of race. You're in a diverse state with many different racial groups, and this matters for you. Black and Hispanic adults are less likely than whites to own a traditional computer or have high-speed internet at home. 82% of whites own a desktop or laptop computer, compared with 58% of Blacks and 57% of Hispanics. 79% of whites have broadband at home, compared to 66% of Blacks and then 61% of Hispanics. Smartphones are a key method for Blacks and Hispanics to access the internet, information, and looking for work. However, Blacks, Hispanics, and lower-income smartphone users are about twice as likely as whites to have canceled or cut off service because of the cost. This disruption of access can be devastating because mobile devices play a larger role for Black and Hispanic people, as 25% of Hispanics and 23% of Blacks are smartphone-only internet users, which means they own a smartphone but lack traditional home broadband service. 12% of whites are smartphone-only by comparison. Now let's look at the issue of education. And you're going to see some really clear variations here. The less education a household has, the less likely the home uses the internet at all or has a computer. Only 71% of people with less than a high school education use the internet compared to 98% of college graduates. If a household is less familiar with computing devices, even smartphone or tablets, they're less likely to know how much valuable information is available online, much of which is free. Non-adopting parents may also not realize how important the internet has become for students, especially in underperforming schools. Those without internet service are more likely to be heavy users of government services, and many may be unaware that many of those services are online. In addition, for those that have never been online or spend less time online, they may not be aware of opportunities broadband offers for job skills, health information, smarter shopping, civic engagement, or using e-government services and as an alternative to the costly process of visiting government offices in person. So now let's talk about jobs, right? So this is always a key topic for us as economic developers. In 517 of 545 US occupations, the use of digital skills has increased 57% on average from 2002 to 2016. So the jobs with digital skills are growing, pay higher wages, and they're more resilient. Whites remain overrepresented in high-level occupations such as engineering and management, as well as medium-level digital areas such as business and finance, the arts, legal, and education professions. Blacks are overrepresented in medium digital occupations, such as office and administrative support, community and social service, and low digital level jobs such as transportation, personal care, and building and grounds maintenance. Hispanics are significantly underrepresented in high-level digital, technical, business, and finance occupation groups, and somewhat underrepresented in medium-level legal, sales, and education jobs. So this data is from 2016, but if we were to think about it, right, here, this is where generally this is about the kind of the minority groups. So everything less than this, where you don't see minority groups, is where there is underrepresentation. Now let's look at this by sex. So men continue to dominate the highest level digital occupation, such as computer engineering and management fields. Women represent about 3/4 of the workforce in many of the medium digital occupation groups, such as healthcare, office admin, and education. The gap of women working in tech industry, which creates digital products and services, is significant. Facebook, Google, and Apple have 17%, 19%, and 23% women in their technology staff, respectively. Multiple surveys, such as the Elephant in the Valley, have documented systemic discrimination against women. Now I'd like to talk about kind of how all of these pieces move together. And there is a cycle of information poverty, because what happens is that as there's less access to computers and internet broadband, then you have less education and knowledge. Less education and knowledge then results in less services, and then less job opportunities, and then less income. So this is a cycle that is really at the core of the work that we're doing in economic development, which is why we need to think more broadly about our role and responsibility. So we all represent geographies. So let's look at how digital kind of competence impacts our communities. So limited access to the internet and computing devices, as the data that we just talked about showed, is a barrier to becoming digitally skilled, and a long-term barrier to the economic opportunities of the better quality jobs that increasingly require digital skills. This phenomenon is having a growing impact on local economies, the ones that we serve, because areas where more digitally savvy residents earn higher average wages. Communities that do not increase information access through the internet and computer devices risk geographic economic exclusion if the highest paying jobs and the greatest economic output are created in tech-savvy regions of the world, while the other regions are left behind. And I don't want any of your communities to get left behind because you don't have this digital competency and access. Now let's talk about what it is that economic developers can do. I'm going to share 5 solutions, the first of which is the use of public broadband. Government agencies are delivering public internet services, which in many cases is both faster and cheaper than corporate internet service providers. These systems can guarantee net neutrality and offer competition in areas in which private providers functionally have a monopoly or duopoly. So think about this just in your own community. If you wanted high-speed internet access, how many choices do you have? In many locations in the US, they have one choice. Sometimes they have two choices, but that's not a lot of competition. So citywide broadband access is important for enabling equitable access to all residents wherever they are located and not just in public hotspots. You actually see in these pictures that I'm sharing with you, these are all public hotspots, but it's not realistic, especially from an economic development perspective, that you need to go to a public park to access high-speed internet or the internet at all. Another issue is that 17% of teens say they are often or sometimes unable to complete homework assignments because they do not have reliable access to a computer or internet connection. So many public serving agencies can benefit from public broadband, including education, certainly ours, economic development, for all the reasons I mentioned before, and because freely accessible broadband is a competitive location advantage for business startups and attraction because customers spend more money in business with free Wi-Fi. And I hope we can talk about that a little bit more later. But it's a benefit for tourism and disaster response. Because this is an investment in business success for companies and employees today, and in the investment in the future workforce in the schools, we as economic developers in our organizations are well positioned to make the economic case for this investment. First, let's look at what's going on nationally. These are all of the locations where community broadband networks exist. The states shown in red are where there are barriers to implementation. Now let's look more closely at Louisiana. And you can see in Louisiana, this has happened. In Lafayette, and I hope that I saw on the list there some people from Lafayette. So you're in a very unique situation. You are the one in your states who have implemented this. And this is what's interesting to me about this is that as this happened, it was actually covered in the American Conservative. So clearly this is a conservative publication. And their view, you can see from the title, is fleeced by the telecoms and your state is blessing it. And as you read more, and anybody who's interested in this article, I'm happy to share it with you. I will be sharing this presentation. They basically, and this is a quote from it, says, but in Lafayette, a conservative legislature is steamrolling what can only be described as a local conservative effort to save money and increase the quality of service to the community. So don't think about community broadband as like an issue for the left or the right, for people who are whatever political spectrum. Think about this in terms of the economic issues of being able to provide service. So I think that this really can be something that impacts across the political spectrum, and we're seeing that. The next solution is about data for entrepreneurs. And small businesses and prospective entrepreneurs face information access obstacles that limit their ability to get quality information to operate, improve, or start their business. Whereas larger or well-funded businesses may have technical staff and a digital infrastructure to acquire and manage business intelligence and research, small businesses and new entrepreneurs are less likely to have the digital skills to access this information and are likely to be excluded because of their inability to afford it. In today's information economy, businesses without access to information are at a material disadvantage, which can result in their failure. Let's look at an example, and we'll look at an example here in Louisiana. I saw George is actually on the list of attendees. So George is doing some innovative stuff, and I'd like to talk about what they're doing. Now, keep in mind, economic developers, the whole issue of serving small businesses and entrepreneurs at scale has been very difficult for us. And it's not our fault, because how do we do that at scale? There's only so many of us as human beings, and we can only meet with so many businesses. I'll share with you a different approach. It's a data-driven approach, which allows the Southwest Louisiana Economic Development Alliance to scale. If you go onto their website, and all of you can go onto their website, you can see this tool. And so what they're able to do is businesses in their community can go on. All they have to do is enter in the industry that they're in and the city that they're in. And then they can benchmark their performance. In this case, we're looking at revenue. And it's comparing it to all of, I think in this case, we're looking at architecture firms. But this information is both industry specific and it's hyper local. This is not like retail in the US or something like that, or manufacturing as a general case. This is specific. It's the flower shop. It's the architecture firm. They can also see if they're in an industry that is growing or declining, because you want to make different decisions based on the future of your industry. You can find out how large your business is. We're looking or trying to help small businesses. When you look at it from a data-driven perspective, you can really turn the analysis on its head, because what a small shoe store is relative to all businesses may actually be a big retailer in your community. And within a few minutes, you get this overall dashboard of the business's health. You can see what it is the business is measuring, the numbers for their company, and you don't have to have an MBA or a background in quantitative analytics to understand on this gauge that red is less and green is more. Businesses in Southwest Louisiana can also help discover potential new customers. They can identify disposable income so they can get those consumer dollars. They can optimize their advertising to find underserved markets, and they can analyze the demographics around their specific business, where their business is the center of the world. When we think about entrepreneurship, there's something very unique that's happening in the world right now that didn't happen in the last recession, which is that new business starts are exploding like we've not seen in the recent past. And you can see in the last recession that basically things were very flat. In this recession, it's just absolutely shooting through the roof. So are your communities positioned to take advantage of this national trend? Do you have the tools? Do you have the infrastructure to be able to support them so that they can start? Because the same tools that I showed you that Southwest Louisiana is using, this is also something that can be used by entrepreneurs so they can put together a business plan and figure out if it's viable. Don't miss out on this. It may be, for many of us in our profession, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The third solution is about small business assistance. Small businesses create the overwhelming majority of all net new jobs. Locally owned businesses also contribute more locally through a higher local economic multiplier. We need to understand that small businesses have a big impact. It's true that they are about 50% of the GDP in the US. Their impact on your local economy is more. Why? Because of the way that those dollars get recycled, the economic multipliers in your community. There's been research around this. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but you can see through multiple studies that whether it's a chain competitor, a big box retailer, these types of businesses, there is more secondary spending that occurs in your communities by keeping those dollars there with local small businesses, because those business owners live in your community. The other thing is if you look at, and many of our organizations are judged based on how many jobs we're creating. When we look from 1993 to 2015 at what types of companies created net new jobs, there's no competition at all. Small businesses created 425% more net new jobs than large companies. So if your economic development organization said, we are all in on small businesses in 1993, you would have produced 425% more jobs than if you were focused on big businesses. Now, although 85% of US businesses are owned by white men, by focusing programming and assistance towards small businesses, our economic development organizations are also able to target the growing share of minority-owned businesses. The rate of minority business ownership in 2012 was 14.6%, compared with 11.5% in 2007. Economic developers' support of small business in many ways, including business retention expansion programs, economic gardening, and delivering free access to industry market research and business intelligence. These are all ways it can be done. Small businesses experience information deficiency, right? That's what we're talking about. So providing them with greater amounts of information and data is needed to help level the business playing field. And this is something, so even if people are saying, well, we're not going to focus on this issue necessarily of race. Well, if you focus on small business, this is an area where minorities are growing, and minority-owned businesses help those kind of improve those minority communities. And if you're wondering, there's no question, small businesses in your community are desperate for your help, perhaps now more than ever. Fourth solution is about computers and training. A lack of high-speed internet and the types of larger screen computer devices typically used for job searches harm employment opportunities for job seekers. Searching and applying for jobs is increasingly moving online through job posting websites and online submissions for jobs. Right now, over 80% of Fortune 500 companies require online job applications. Desktop versions of websites frequently have more features and information than the mobile device screen versions of web pages. This disadvantage underconnected people who are smartphone only. And think about this for yourself. If you were applying for a job, would you want to do that on your phone? Yet so many, and these are people in your community, are put in a position where they have to do this. Also, there's research study from the University of Southern California showed that computer access, and they had a boot camp training, it improved job prospects for low-income residents. And in their sample, which was in Los Angeles, was primarily African Americans and Latinos. And over half of the people in this had not completed even middle school. What they found is that adult participants took advantage of their newly acquired computer skills and put them to use towards submitting resumes and filling out employment applications through online sources at a significantly greater rate than non-participants. Now, our profession of economic development, we're very adept at making calculations to justify multi-million-dollar financial incentives for job-creating companies coming into a community. $1 million could buy 4,000 Chromebooks. And that's at retail prices, right? You wouldn't pay that. If you had $1 million to spend, you'd probably get twice as many. But this could be provided to marginalized residents of a community. So this is, again, something to consider as different ways to think about how we use our resources to achieve or better achieve the objectives that have been set out for us by our boards. A fifth way to address this issue is the issue of funding. Programs funded by government and economic development can measure how well they serve those which are most in need. This can be accomplished by tracking both who is served and the impact of the services provided. By simply measuring the income, race, sex, education, age, and other demographic characteristics, economic development organizations can quantify how effective they are at serving marginalized populations. All of this leads to what? We really need to expand the economic development that we're doing. We have done lots of different types of strategies, but the economy has changed in a very fundamental way. The way that we work has changed in a very fundamental way. And what this is creating is winners and losers. There are regions, there are cities, there are counties that are becoming economic winners and losers based on this. And I don't want any of your communities to be on the wrong side of this, because what happens is the gap becomes farther and farther and farther. What we have done is we have focused our work on, as economic developers, on traditional programs such as real estate development and reuse, business retention and expansion, business attraction, marketing, tourism, and other long-standing practices. I know I practiced all of these. I was involved in all of these when I worked in local economic development. However, the barriers to positive economic development are changing as the economy is evolving, with much of the change emanating from the transformative impact of technology and information. For the economic development profession to keep up with the times and remain relevant, it must transform its time, programs, and budget toward the new opportunities to enable economic development through the reduction of information poverty. This really is a new idea and practice which needs to be a priority for us. As we think about expansion, a way to think about this is that, okay, this is the small space that we've been dealing with, which frankly is already quite overwhelming. It's a lot of work, but we need to jump into a new opportunity, a bigger opportunity to impact our communities, which means different services, more services, but with greater impact. So this could be one way to think about it. But I'm actually going to argue that this metaphor of the sole goldfish jumping from a smaller goldfish bowl to a large one is actually the wrong one. Instead, what I'd like to say is that I think what is more correct as a metaphor is that we as economic developers are in a very crowded market space with tons of competition. And as hard as we're working, we're doing a lot of the same stuff, and that makes it harder for us to be successful. The opportunity for us is actually to expand by jumping into the blue ocean, where there is less competition, there is more opportunity, and you can differentiate yourself by doing what your competitors are not doing. These are the things that are going to create what will be the economic development winners and losers of the future. And so I encourage you to do what your competitors in our profession are afraid to do or afraid to change, because you're going to see bigger results.
Yeah, that was great, Anatolia. Thank you so much for that. Anatolia, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. I know the audience does, and Brack does. This is a really, really important conversation. Thanks for bringing it to us.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Anatalia. We appreciate it so much again. We'd like to thank all our participants too.
Thank you so much for
Thanks
having
again.
me.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great day.